Now, don't freak out. Your sponge is not going to be this big because I doubled the recipe and I used a bowl that was too small.
Micromanger, courageous cooking in a crowd kitchen.
I am a proud, born and bred New York City gal, and I grew up with some of the best bagels in the world. But what happens when life shuts down, the world shuts down? You can't go out to your favorite bagel shop. You know what you do? You make your own bagel, and I'm gonna show you how to do it. There's a bunch of steps, but they're all doable, and you can do it if you're courageous. So come on and join me. The first thing we do is to make a sponge. What is a sponge? A sponge is simply flour, water, yeast, and some kind of sweetener. I'm using malt syrup, which is classic for a bagel, but if you can't find malt syrup, you can use honey, you can use maple syrup, you can use molasses. They do sell malt syrup at beer brewing places though, and health food stores. I love using malt syrup. I've got my water up to about 90 degrees, which is just a little warm to the touch. You don't want to make it hot because it'll kill the yeast. 90 degrees, just like baby bath water. So we're gonna add, to make our sponge, the malt syrup and the water, then the yeast. I use dry active yeast, not instant yeast. Dry active, different than instant. My chefs at school hated instant. I don't even know what instant does. Flour. The sponge is gonna pre-ferment for an hour and a half before we make the final dough. And what that does is it gives the yeast a time to grow and bloom, and it actually makes the final rise on the bagel much quicker. This has gotta go for about 4 minutes. If you don't have a mixing bowl, you can do this by hand. All right, she is all mixed together. It's a very, very wet sponge, but you will see an hour and a half from now how the magic happens. So I'm just gonna take this dough out of the metal bowl because metal kind of inhibits yeast growth. So you want to let it ferment or proof in glass or plastic. Cover your sponge and let it rest and proof for about an hour and a half. And wait till you see how big she gets. Now, the kind of flour that goes into bagels that you get in a store or restaurant is called high gluten flour. It's a high protein flour, but it's not really available to home bakers. So I just use regular bread flour. You gotta use bread flour though, because if you use AP flour or pastry flour, it's just gonna be a roll with a hole. Time to make the final dough and take our gigantic sponge, which, ooh, look at how fabulously yeasty and, oh my, I'm sorry. The ingredients for the final dough are pretty much the same as for the sponge. It's bread flour, room temp water with the malt syrup, yeast, and this is when you add salt. So, look at our sponge, she's so happy. In goes all the water. The yeast we'll put in with the water so it has time to sort of bloom in there. But at this point, you've got lots of yummy working yeast. All of the flour, all of it. Now I'm gonna give it a little love. Oh my gosh. See, I doubled the recipe because I'm giving some of these bagels away. But yours will not fill your bowl so high, because unless you want to make double the recipe, then you need a bigger bowl. Salt goes in last, because we just kind of want to let everything get absorbed. Bagel dough gets what's called an intense knead. That means that you're going to knead it for a good long time to develop all of the glutens and proteins and make it really stretchy. And I'm gonna do it on my machine. It's about 4 minutes on low and then 4 minutes on high. If you're doing it by hand, you're gonna be kneading for about 15 minutes, but let me tell you, you're gonna earn that bagel once it's done. So 4 minutes on kind of a low medium. And this is what's called the pickup stage when you're making a bread. The dough is picking up all the flour. It's getting everything all happy with each other. So here is the dough after 4 minutes on a low speed. I'm gonna give it a little scrape down, and then I'm going to do 4 minutes on a high speed. If you wanna add any mix-ins, now is the time. When I say mix-ins, like if you wanna add cinnamon and raisins, which is not really what I like to put in a bagel, but if that's what you like, this is the time to do it. You add your mix-ins now when the dough has come together, but it's not fully kneaded. Now we go back on the mixer, holding down the dough. Oh, come on. Oh, my poor machine. She's gonna have a heart attack and die one day. One day this machine's just gonna give up on me, I know it. Look how wonderful and stiff and this is what bagel dough should feel like. Now, I'm gonna show you how to do the last bit of kneading. If you're doing it by hand, this is how you do it. Give it a good workout. If you're doing this by hand though, the whole thing, it's gonna take about 10 to 15 minutes of this. I made a double batch, so I'm making a dozen bagels. The recipe that I'm gonna give you makes between 6 and 7 bagels that are large, and if you like smaller bagels, make smaller bagels. Now's the time to pre-shape our bagels into logs. You don't really need a whole lot of flour on your board because actually the flour is gonna make them drier and drier, so there's just a little flour, just what was left over from kneading. And the logs, they don't have to be perfect. We're just pre-shaping into logs. We're gonna let these, we're gonna cover, and let them rest for like 10 minutes. That lets the glutens and the proteins in the dough relax so that then we can stretch them and shape them. Now I'm ready to roll these logs into a longer rope to shape my bagel. You have to have your sheet pan ready. I like to use parchment paper, then I don't have to use any grease or fat, but if you don't have parchment paper, just lightly grease a sheet pan. Now, we take these beautiful logs and we roll them out. And you want the ends to be tapered so that you just give them a good stretch. You can feel it. It's kind of fun. Kids can help with this. Put them together, give them a little squeeze, a little roll of that side. One bagel. And they don't have to be perfect. In fact, imperfect is better. Taper the ends. Put them together. Give them a little squeeze. You're gonna see these are gonna puff up even more. So the hole looks mighty big right now, but by the time we get to putting them in the oven, you'll see. I have set up my boiling and dipping station. I love everything seasoning, but I find that sometimes it's too salty. So what I do is I do about half everything seasoning, and then I add more sesame seeds and more poppy seeds to make it a little less salty. In the water, I've got some honey, and that adds a little sweetness to the crust, which makes it crunchier. What you're doing when you boil the bagels is you are pre-gelatinizing the starches on the outside of the bagel, and what happens when they bake in the oven is that pre-gelatinization turns into a crispy, crunchy crust. We're at a full boil, and I do maybe 1 or 2 bagels at a time. Slip it in, slip it in. In the time it takes you to sing the first verse of New York, New York, start spreading the news. I'm boiling you today. Da 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 da. And I might give it a little flip. So the others, well, come on now, cooperate. Flippity flip. It doesn't want to flip. There we go. A little flippity flip. A little flippity flip. A little flippity flap. I don't know. You know, I don't set a timer. 30 to 60 seconds. They kind of puff and. One more time. All right, I'm gonna dip these in. You go straight from the boiling water into your seed mixture. Oh, it's hot. Oh, ha, ha, and back onto your sheet pan. Don't burn your fingers. This is not the part where the kids can help. Into the seed mix. Tossity toss. Oh, ooh, ha. And onto the tray. The last 3. I'm making plain because that's what my producer wants. Yay! Plain bagels. But you boil those plain bagels too because we want the outside to get crispy. They go into a 475-degree oven. Woo! For 15 to 18 minutes. 15, we'll check them. Been 15 minutes, let's check these babies. Ooh, they look beautiful, but I think they need 3 more minutes. I'm gonna give them a turn, since there's so many of them. Stick them back in. 3 more minutes. Oh, I wish you could smell it. It smells like the Upper West Side on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning. Look at my gorgeous bagels. Now, I know there are a lot of steps to make these, but 3 hours from start to finish, I made a dozen bagels, and you can do it too. New York style bagels, approved by this New Yorker.
Micromanja, courageous cooking in a crab kitchen.